Leandros did nothing wrong is a phrase that for many within the 40K community, it probably generates a visceral feeling of disgust. And for good reason. He's easily the most hated character in the entire franchise. And not the good kind of hated like Erebus or Lucius, where they're really well written and the whole point is that you're supposed to hate them. Leandros is just annoying. He whinges and complains about everything Captain Titus, and by proxy we as the players, attempt to do. For many, his name has become synonymous with betrayal and cowardice, which is the exact opposite of what an Ultramarine is supposed to be. It's honestly pretty difficult to go anywhere 40K's lore is being discussed, whether online or in person, without somebody jumping out of the woodwork to exclaim just how much they hate this character. He even has an entire subreddit dedicated specifically to hating on him, which admittedly isn't 100% unique, but it's still pretty impressive. Here's the thing though, what if I was to tell you that despite the numerous reasons why hating on this character is justified, a large portion of that hate is actually being misdirected and based on misconceptions? What if Leandros was actually right about everything? Now, I know that's kind of hard to even consider. Leandros isn't some larger-than-life, morally complex anti-villain, the type that seem to be way overused in media nowadays, that we can debate their ethics and morals. However, in recent times, I've personally been seeing a lot of hot takes about this character that don't seem to make any sense. Some of them are rather tame, and I can kind of sorta understand where they come from. Whereas others, and I'm gonna put this as lightly as possible, are wildly unhinged and miss the entire point of what 40K is all about. So today I want to do something a little bit different. I don't want to just explain why everybody hates a certain character. I want to try to play devil's advocate for them and actually defend the most hated character in all of 40K. I'm anticipating this video being a little bit more controversial than normal, and I'm definitely interested to hear what y'all's take is on this one in the comment section. Just do me a favor and hear me out, wait till the end of the video before you get out your pitchforks and torches. In this video, we're going to be talking about whether or not Leandros actually disrespected the chain of command when he summoned the Inquisition at the end of the first game. We're going to talk about the events of Space Marine 1 from his perspective, and we're going to dive into whether or not him becoming a chaplain was actually secretly a punishment. We're going to talk about all that and a whole lot more in this one, but before we dive headfirst into the grimdark, a quick shout out to this video's sponsor. Now, I know this is going to come as a surprise to a few of you because I've definitely let myself go over the last year. Life's been pretty crazy, but I'm actually super big into exercising and going to the gym. I genuinely love lifting weights, swimming, really anything except for running. Not a fan of that. I got them short corgi legs. The big problem for me was pad thai. But aside from that, it was that I was never able to find a brand of athletic wear that I actually liked. And most of the ones I tried were either way too tight or weren't casual enough. But that all changed when I found Fabletics, the sponsor of this video. I've been wearing my Fabletics for about a month now, and so far I'm ridiculously impressed. The material is both super comfortable and breathable without feeling flimsy. And best of all, their outfits just look sick. If you didn't know, I live down in Florida, and sweltering is pretty much the only word that accurately describes the weather here. Which sucks because I'm huge into cycling as my main form of cardio, and I can only really do that comfortably about half the year. But thanks to the sweat-wicking fabric that Fabletics uses, I'm able to get my miles in comfortably even in the middle of a Florida summer. But it gets even better, because if you sign up as a VIP, you get a frankly insane intro offer. I'm talking 80% off the entire site. And you heard me right, 80% off the entire site. I thought that sounded ridiculous when they first told me that, but apparently it's true. Not only that, every month you get a credit that scores you a two-piece outfit or any product worth up to $100. And that's not all. Included in the VIP perks are monthly drops, early access to styles, VIP-only sales, a free membership to the Fit app, and the entire thing is super flexible. You can skip any month between the 1st and the 5th without being charged. So if you want to experience some of the most comfortable, good-looking clothes on the market, then click on my link in the description to get 80% off site-wide when you sign up as a VIP. Big thanks to Fabletics for sponsoring this video. We were first introduced to the characters of Leandros and Captain Titus all the way back on September 6, 2011, with the release of the original Space Marine game. Although I and many other 40K fans absolutely loved this game, the sales numbers don't lie. The first game was a success for sure, but it never reached the heights of the big hitters of the time like Halo or Call of Duty. Meanwhile, Space Marine 2 sold over 7 million copies, bringing in a massive new wave of players. most of whom had no idea how big of a deal it was when the chaplain of the game finally took his helmet off at the end and revealed Leandros' soft, pudgy, punchable face that us old school fans absolutely despise. It's actually kind of amazing. Normally, a twist ending like that would get the audience hyped, but this might have been the first time I've ever seen the exact opposite happen. Everyone was loving this chaplain. He seemed like a no-nonsense badass. Then, all of a sudden, boom, it's Leandros, and all that goodwill vanished in a split second. I've got to imagine that most of the new fans were completely confused. They didn't understand why we were so angry. They don't know how he betrayed Captain Titus at the end of the first game. They don't know how his rigid devotion to the Codex Astartes made him unable to think for himself. They don't know how this arrogant rookie broke the chain of command and committed one of the biggest sins a Space Marine can. He snitched to the Inquisition. Now, that's the version of the story that most of the fan base has internalized, and I'll admit, I believed this myself for many years. But after recently replaying through both games, I gotta be honest, I'm starting to see Leandros a little bit differently. A lot of what I thought I knew way back when I originally played this game over a decade ago was based on old misconceptions that I had back then when I didn't know nearly as much about 40K as I do now. So this video is going to be my attempt to play devil's advocate for 40K's most hated character. First, we're going to do a super abridged recap of the first game, but from Leandros' perspective. Then we'll dive into the meat and potatoes of this video, where I break down and challenge the strongest arguments that fans have made against him over the years. Okay, so let's get into it. The first Space Marine game opens up with the Forge World of Graia being under siege by orcs, who have breached orbit and seized control of key anti-air defenses. Now, during the opening mission, Captain Titus makes a bold and arguably reckless decision to drop from a Thunderhawk mid-flight, crashing through the enemy fire to reach the surface. Even Sidonis, a seasoned veteran, questions this move. Leandros, who's still loyal but concerned, also raises objections, telling him that the Codex Astartes explicitly doesn't support this action. He's not trying to be difficult, he's genuinely concerned, and honestly, who wouldn't be? Captain Titus brushes him off and mockingly tells him to try to keep up. But Leandros isn't wrong here. Charging headlong into a war zone without a plan isn't strategic brilliance, it's a gamble, one that nearly gets them killed. Now, it's definitely a cool moment for us as the players, but lore-wise, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Even still, Leandros follows his captain into the fray. Now, it's not uncommon for Leandros both in and out of universe to frequently get characterized as being inflexible in his beliefs and unable to deviate from the Codex Astartes, which will come up a few times throughout this video. But shortly after this opening, we see something that immediately breaks this narrative, as it's Leandros, not Titus, who comes up with the idea to destroy the orc-controlled macro cannon by rigging a melt-a-charge to one of its shells. The plan is ultimately a success and the gun ends up getting destroyed. It's honestly a pretty impressive display of battlefield initiative for a Codex thumper. Even Sidonis praises him for it. Now, things escalate when the squad encounters Inquisitor Drogon and his mysterious power source, which turns out to channel warp energy. Titus is oddly trusting of the Inquisitor, despite constant secrecy, potential danger, and mounting red flags. Leandros, by contrast, grows increasingly alarmed and jumps to the conclusion that this device is linked to chaos. And as will become a pattern throughout this video, Titus and Sidonis once again brush him off. And that's because warp energy has been used by other Imperial devices in the past. But here's the thing, Leandros' gut instinct here is absolutely right, but I'm getting ahead of myself. A little bit after this, they locate the device and fight off a bunch of orcs. Titus grabs the thing in his own hands, which triggers a huge explosion of warp energy. But miraculously, he's totally fine. That's something that definitely shouldn't have happened, as Drogon later explains. One should not be able to touch the warp and walk away unscathed unless they themselves are part of chaos. But Titus seems to be the exception to this for some reason. Now, shortly after this, chaos finally shows its face, and we're introduced to the true villain behind what's happening here on Graia. You see, the Inquisitor was lying to them, and by using the device to power a weapon known as the Scourge, the only thing they really managed to accomplish is open a portal for demons to start flooding onto this world, as well as the Chaos Lord Nemeroth. Drogon is revealed to be nothing more than one of his corpse puppets, and after this, Nemeroth takes a particular interest in Titus. He finds him fascinating for his ability to resist the touch of the warp, just like himself. He praises him for helping his plans unfold. The implication here being that Titus, whether knowingly or not, has just worked to further the agenda of chaos. So at this point, Leandros is fearing the worst, and if we're fair here, who can really blame him? Titus is exhibiting resistance to warp corruption, which again is a massive red flag. He's been making all kinds of rash, impulsive decisions, at least from Leandros' perspective, as they all seem to go directly counter to the rules that he's been taught to hold sacred, something that a chaos double agent would do. And worst of all, Titus never takes the time to explain himself or have a real conversation about what's going on. Over and over, he dismisses Leandros' concerns and often just straight up mocks him. Leandros can't see inside of his mind. He doesn't know his captain's intentions. So from his perspective, there are three possibilities here. Either one, Titus is deceiving them and is in fact a chaos double agent. Or two, he's a double agent for chaos that doesn't know he's a double agent for chaos and is being manipulated by chaos. Or three, he's completely innocent. But here's the thing about Warhammer 40K, and it conjures the age-old adage of the Inquisition. In the grimdark future, innocence proves nothing. One could live their entire life furthering the agenda of the Chaos Gods with every single action that they take, and never fully understand that this is happening. Chaos, by its very nature, is insidious and manipulative to the extreme. It may be true that Titus truly believes he isn't a heretic, but ultimately, that doesn't really matter. And Leandros understands this. But he's hesitating. He's not sure. He still needs a little bit more evidence, but the clock is ticking. His inaction could directly lead to a disaster of apocalyptic proportions. A little bit after this, he once again raises his concerns, pointing out that Titus has now held the device unshielded twice and survived, that the Codex warns those in league with chaos can withstand the warp's touch. Sidonis tells him enough, this isn't the time or place to be having this conversation, and Titus, to his credit, does tell him that he doesn't take this warp resistance lightly, but agrees with Sidonis that now was not the time. The search for answers would have to wait until after they dealt with the current chaos invasion, but Leandros warns them that it could be too late by then. Which, I'm gonna be real with you, going through this game again for this video and watching all of these cutscenes again, I feel the same frustration with Leandros that I did a decade ago. However, I've learned a lot about this franchise in the last decade, and looking at these events here again, I don't think Leandros is wrong here. If Titus is unknowingly being manipulated here and guided into a set course of actions that will ultimately bring about a chaos victory, not taking like a minute to talk about this seems kind of insane. Like, Leandros is the only one of them who's actually acting like an ultramarine here. Now, admittedly, at the time this game came out, this was 5th edition Warhammer, which was the Matt Ward era of Warhammer. Now, we're not going to get into all of the controversy surrounding him and his contributions to the setting, but at this time, the Ultramarines had deviated way far away from what they were supposed to be, and they kind of became the Mary Sue chapter, where they would have rules and things that made them unique on Monday, but on Tuesday, in the name of doing something really super duper cool, all of that lore would just be thrown out the window. This scene in the game is a perfect moment for the iconic Ultramarines practice of throwing around practicals and theoreticals. But again, that doesn't happen. A little while after this, Sidonis ends up taking the warp device for safekeeping, but unfortunately ends up getting killed by Nemeroth, causing the power source to fall into the Chaos Lord's hands. To his credit, Leandros only shows up after Nemeroth has vanished and Titus is leaning over Sidonis' corpse. Now, you would think that this would play into his suspicions that Titus is a heretic, but to his credit, that doesn't really seem to be the case. He doesn't blame Titus for his brother's death, but there is something that he is suspicious about. Titus' statement that they should split up, that he will face the Chaos Lord alone, when he is most vulnerable and attempting to ascend into a demon prince. Leandros tells him point blank that that's either suicide or worse, exactly what the Chaos Lord wants. Titus, understanding the implication of Leandros' questions, asks him if he thinks he's falling to chaos, and Leandros tells him that he doesn't. But we can see in his expression that he's not entirely convinced of those words. How can he be? Titus is a great man for sure, but far greater men than him, even the Primarchs, have been corrupted by chaos. As always, Titus doesn't bother to reassure him or have a meaningful discussion. He just brushes him off again with more cryptic bravado. After this, we move into the end of the game and the big showdown between Titus and Nemeroth. This is where Nemeroth himself confirms that Titus is intrinsically linked to the warp. Whether intentionally or not, everything he's been doing up until this point has been furthering his agenda. It's ironic, as they're both on polar opposite ends of the spectrum, but this Demon Prince and Leandros have come to the same conclusion about Titus. In the final moments of the game, we're shown an inquisitorial gunship touching down, and out steps an Inquisitor and a retinue of Black Templars, who ask Leandros if he's sure of his accusation, to which Leandros tells them that he is. Titus is a traitor and a heretic. Now, of course, Titus denies this because from his perspective, he's a goddamn hero. He's as loyal as they come. He just banished a demon prince back to oblivion. But the Inquisitor asks him if it's possible that he had unholy assistants, to which Titus doesn't really have an answer. In order to prevent a full-blown investigation into the Ultramarines and all of the guardsmen and women on Graia, Titus agrees to go with them willingly and submit to the Inquisition's will. In his parting words to Leandros, he tells him that he has failed at being an Ultramarine. And that's where their storyline came to a close until the second game released over 10 years later. Now, Leandros would be present throughout the events of the second game as well, but that's not something that's revealed to us until the very end of the story. As it turns out, he was seemingly rewarded for his betrayal of Captain Titus, as he's now become a chaplain, something that caught a lot of fans off guard, and to many, didn't really make any kind of sense. Why was this guy rewarded for snitching? But Wes, I hear a few of you asking, why would they make someone a chaplain who clearly does not respect the chaplain's authority? Didn't he go against the chain of command when he made his report to the Inquisition instead of the Reclusium? Doesn't it explicitly state in the Codex Astartes that issues of suspected corruption are supposed to be handled in-house? Doesn't that make him a hypocrite? If he's preaching the virtue of the Codex one minute, only to go against its tenets the next, and also conveniently condemning Titus of the same behavior? No, it doesn't, and no, he didn't. Next question. All right, wait a minute, hold up. Actually, that one does deserve a little bit more of an explanation, as I'll fully admit, it's not something I realized myself until I did a whole bunch of research first. Many Warhammer 40K fans believe that suspected corruption cases are almost always handled in-house by a chapter's chaplains, that the Codex Astartes states the Inquisition should not be called upon unless absolutely necessary, and then the only ones who have the authority to make that call are the chaplains or the chapter master himself. This is why many Warhammer fans call Leandros a hypocrite. He spends the game preaching adherence to the Codex and condemning Titus for breaking from its teachings, yet when push comes to shove, he goes against the code he claims to hold in such high regard by ignoring the chain of command and bringing his accusation right to the top. At face value, this take makes a lot of sense, and it's why I believe it's such a common argument against Leandros. I'll admit it's one that I believe myself for quite some time. However, in doing research for this video, I could not find a single source that explicitly states this to be so. What I believe has happened here is that two parallel pieces of lore that are not inherently linked together have been combined in the minds of fans in order to justify their hatred of Leandros, which, in fairness to them, they don't really need to justify why they hate Leandros. It's totally okay to hate this character. But when they invoke the lore to validate their feelings, now we gotta talk about it. First off, it's true that one of the roles of a chaplain is to monitor their brothers for weakness of spirit, faith, and will. The vast majority of the time, corruption cases will in fact be handled by them, and in some cases, also the librarians. Now second, it's also true that Space Marine chapters do not always see eye to eye with the Inquisition, and would be wary of courting investigation by them. If it's done in-house, they can quietly deal with it themselves. If the Inquisition gets involved, the consequences could be dire. In extreme cases, the entire chapter may be condemned as heretics for the actions of one individual. However, this does not mean there's always an antagonistic relationship between these two organizations. Opinions will differ from chapter to chapter and individual to individual, but for the most part, the Inquisition is held in high esteem, especially by the Ultramarines, who again are the most compliant by-the-book founding chapter. Chaplains also are not nearly as specialized as an Inquisitor when it comes to rooting out heresy. That's only part of a chaplain's job, whereas for an Inquisitor, one with the authority of the Emperor himself and unlimited resources at his disposal, who spent their entire life studying exactly this, an investigation handled by them is going to almost always be much more thorough. Okay, so maybe it makes sense for some Space Marines sometimes to reach out directly to the Inquisition, but it still doesn't make sense for Leandros, right? He's obsessed with following the rules of the Codex Astartes, and doesn't that book specifically say to never get the Inquisition involved? Now, I've seen this take floating around a lot on the internet, and I'll be honest, I don't exactly know where it comes from, considering that the Codex is mostly centered around tactics, chapter organization, and how a Space Marine should conduct themselves. Unfortunately, we do not have a physical copy of the Codex to read for ourselves, so we'll never be 100% sure of what is and is not contained within its pages outside of direct quotes from characters in the books or games. But we can make a pretty educated guess that it contains zero information pertaining to the Inquisition. Remember, Rabute Guilliman wrote the Codex in the 21st year of the 31st millennium, right after the Horus Heresy had concluded. He would then be wounded by his brother Fulgrim at the Battle of Thalza 1 century later and placed in stasis. Now, the Inquisition's timeline, on the other hand, is unsurprisingly mysterious and shrouded in secrecy, just like most things in 40K. We know that it has its roots in the heresy, but we also know that it wouldn't be considered a formal branch of imperial power for several millennia after Guilliman's wounding. By the time of the War of the Beast, halfway through the 32nd millennium, the Inquisition was depicted as a single order operating off of a single planet, and nobody knew about them, a far cry from what they would eventually become. Now, as Guilliman would not have known about the Inquisition until his resurrection, he also probably wouldn't have written anything about them until after he woke back up, which was long after the events of Space Marine 1. The big takeaway here is that although we would expect something like Leandros' accusation of heresy against Titus to always be handled in-house, that's not always the case, and the Inquisition getting involved really isn't that weird. This is one of those things that's more backed up by vibes than concrete information in the lore, and it's something that's been inferred by fans and repeated ad nauseum to the point where it's been taken as fact. For the sake of the argument though, let's say that even if it's technically allowed, going to the Inquisition instead of the chaplains is at bare minimum seen as a big taboo, right? It's fair to assume that even if he didn't technically break any rules, he still messed up in that regard. Here's the thing, I don't think so. But that's because I don't think Leandros actually contacted the Inquisition at all. Bear with me on this. Throughout the events of the first game, we never see a chaplain that Leandros could have reported to. This has led some of Leandros' defenders to argue that the Inquisition was the only available institution to make the report to. And that does make some sense, but I take a few issues with this. Just because we never see a chaplain on the ground doesn't mean that they aren't there, whether they're fighting planetside in a different location, or more likely are stationed in orbit on a strike cruiser. The Vox systems that Leandros, Titus, and Sidonis would have access to would be able to contact one of these chaplains no problem. But you know who they wouldn't be able to contact? The Inquisition. But wait, Wes, I hear you saying, wasn't the Inquisition already on Graia? That's true, Inquisitor Drogon was here, but there's two issues with that. Number one, it said that he had been dead for many years. They had just met his flesh puppet. Number two, just because one Inquisitor's here doesn't mean there's a larger group of them somewhere else. Inquisitors tend to act alone or in their own small cabals. Number three, now assuming Leandros did have that information, he had a way of contacting the Inquisition. His Vox system wouldn't be strong enough to get a message off-world. It would require a trained astropath. And there was literally no opportunity at any point in the game where he could have slipped away, found one, and gotten that message out. Remember in Space Marine 2, just getting to the astropath in that one to send a message to Calgar was like a multi-mission ordeal. And what they were dealing with on Graia, admittedly it was orcs and demons versus Tyranids and Zangors, but it was kind of the same situation. Given all of this, I truly believe that Leandros didn't actually break the chain of command here. He didn't violate the Codex Astartes in that way. He did what he was supposed to. He contacted the Reclusium, who determined that the Inquisition needed to be involved. The chaplains made the report on his behalf, then informed Leandros that an Inquisitor was en route. The Inquisitor we meet at the end would have already been briefed on the situation. He knew who Leandros was, and when he asks if he's sure of his accusation, it's not because they've already spoken, it's because the relevant information had already been relayed to him by the chaplaincy. this is one of those things that's not really spelled out for us in game, so I'll admit I can't prove this one, but just based on the lore, it's the only thing that actually makes sense here. Now, I'll admit this next one's a little bit of a side tangent, but it's a common criticism I see get leveled against Leandros pretty often, and that's that he's young and inexperienced in Space Marine 1. Many fans claim that the reason he's so rigidly attached to the Codex Astartes is that he hasn't lived long enough to develop the kind of battlefield pragmatism that Titus embodies. But there are a few problems with this argument. First and foremost, Leandros is not some fresh-faced neophyte. He's a full-fledged battle brother serving in the command squad of the Ultramarine 2nd Company. That's massive. This position implies not only a significant amount of combat experience, but also a level of tactical aptitude and reliability far beyond the average line Marine. Now, it is true that Leandros is the youngest member of the squad. Both Titus and Sidonis visibly wear 2 service studs in their forehead, indicating over 2 centuries of service, whereas Leandros doesn't have any studs, suggesting that he's served for less than 100 years. But even within that time frame, he's likely been in active, constant service for anywhere from 40 to 99 years. That's not a rookie, that's a battle-hardened Space Marine who has likely fought through multiple campaigns across multiple war zones. To reach this point, Leandros would have had to complete not only his initial transformation from neophyte to full Astartes, but also rotate through multiple companies. By the time a Marine reaches the 2nd Company, he's already survived decades of combat, proven his worth, and demonstrated command-level potential. The idea that he's some inexperienced kid who just doesn't know better, that doesn't hold up to scrutiny. What we're really seeing here isn't a lack of experience, it's a difference in perspective. Leandros isn't inexperienced, he's devout. He isn't inflexible because he's green, he's inflexible because he truly believes that the Codex is the Primarch's will made manifest. And why wouldn't he believe that? This is what he has explicitly been taught. Remember, if he's in the 2nd Company, then that means he's served in the 6th, and one of the core things Ultramarines learn in the 6th Company is how to think for themselves. This is the point in their journey where they're actively told to push back against the Codex, to question its teachings and identify areas in which it can be improved. But some people misunderstand what this lesson is supposed to be about. The idea is that for as great as Guilliman and the Codex are, it's impossible for them to have the answers to everything this galaxy could possibly throw at you. If you adhere to its teachings, the Codex will give you answers for 999,999 engagements out of 1,000,000, but the one in which it doesn't, the one in which you're fighting an enemy that Guilliman had never encountered or a situation he could never have anticipated, that's the one where you need to be able to think outside of the box in order to complete your mission and make sure you and your brothers come home safely. This lesson is not a free pass to throw on a jump pack and jump out of a Thunderhawk in an active war zone because you think it's cool, needlessly endangering your brothers and the mission just because it makes for an awesome video game intro. And make no mistake, it was in fact a badass intro to a video game. I remember a few months after Space Marine 2 came out, seeing this hot take floating around on the internet, that Leandros being made a chaplain in the 2nd game was secretly a punishment for what he did in the 1st, that the higher-ups saw him as unfit not just for the 2nd Company command squad, but even as a regular battle line Astartes, that by making him a chaplain, they were giving him the Space Marine equivalent of a desk job. Now, the first time I saw this, I thought it was just kind of dumb and I moved on with my life. But then I started seeing it pop up a lot more, especially in my own comment section anytime I mentioned Leandros in a video. A couple of people even went off on me in my top 10 most hated characters video when I described Leandros as being frustrated because it felt like he got rewarded for betraying Titus and by proxy us. They told me I was an idiot, that I didn't know what I was talking about because I clearly didn't understand that it wasn't an honor at all. Him being a chaplain was definitely secretly a punishment. Now, if you know me, you know I'm a big proponent of people coming up with their own theories about why things happen the way they do in 40K. The lore is pretty vague and cryptic sometimes, and that's part of the fun. I'm all for headcanon and interpretation, but I'm not gonna lie, that guy got under my skin a little bit. And I'm not immune to being petty, so allow me to rant about this for a minute. The only way I think someone could hear that take and actually believe it is if they don't understand what a chaplain is, what their role in the chapter entails, and how they're viewed by their battle brothers. A chaplain is the team MVP. They are among the most honored and revered Space Marines in the entire chapter. Their bravery is unmatched, their conviction absolute. On the battlefield, they're always on the front lines, where morale is crumbling, where the fighting is thickest, where their presence matters the most. Off the battlefield, they guide their brothers throughout their entire lives, from their induction as neophytes through every company rotation, all the way until the day they die. There may be no one besides the chapter master himself who has more influence over the future of a chapter than the chaplains do, as it is they who pass on their interpretation of the Codex, who shape the beliefs, mindsets, and ideals of future generations of Ultramarines. So we can throw the whole desk job idea out the window. But more importantly, being selected for chaplaincy is not a punishment at all, it's an extreme honor. In what universe would a Space Marine chapter, or any military institution for that matter, take someone they don't trust, someone who doesn't follow the rules, disrespects the chain of command, and has no ability to think for themselves, and say, you know who should be responsible for shaping the minds of every future recruit? That guy. Make it make sense. That take is absolutely insane. Leandros wasn't made a chaplain as punishment. He was made a chaplain because from the in-universe perspective, from the Ultramarines' perspective, he did nothing wrong. Because when it came down to it, he was right to report Titus. He became a chaplain because he was qualified to be one. Everything about Leandros' character aligns with what's required to become a chaplain. He has an unwavering faith in the Emperor. He holds the Codex Astartes as sacred doctrine. He has the courage to make hard, unpopular decisions in the name of duty, even when it means standing alone. He shows discipline, conviction, and an unshakable moral compass. And most importantly, not a shred of mercy. Exactly the kind of qualities a reclusiarch looks for when choosing someone to carry the spiritual legacy of the chapter going forward. For all of his flaws, of which there are many, Leandros embodies all of that to a fault. If anything, becoming a chaplain wasn't just a logical next step for him, it was inevitable. Whew, okay, got a little heated on that one, I'll admit that. I don't go on rants very often, so enjoy that one for what it was, and I'm just gonna go ahead and move on to the next thing I have written here in the script. Before I move into my closing thoughts on this one, I want to throw one last Hail Mary in an attempt to defend Leandros, as it adds a lot of context to the first game when you understand the direction the storyline was originally supposed to go. This bit of information was revealed to us in an interview posted on The Escapist back in 2013. The former director of Space Marine 1, Raphael van Leeuwenhoek, explains that the game was originally planned as a trilogy, and he had a whole story in place for Titus that would have taken a pretty interesting turn. I had some big plans for Titus. Sadly, THQ was already starting to fall apart by then, and it became clear that Space Marine 2 wasn't going to happen. I was pretty heartbroken about that. The second part of the story was to focus on a Titus Unleashed plot. Basically, there were forces arrayed against him that would see his loyalty to the Adeptus Astartes pushed to its limit, and his reaction would be to kind of go rogue. He would survive and come back even stronger in the third game, where other Space Marines still loyal to him would rally around him and he'd return to, quote, clean house, but as the head of a brand new chapter that we would build around him. But I actually found this kind of fascinating. Sure, he says that by the end of the third game, Titus would come back around to being a hero, but that second game would have been one of those good old-fashioned dark middle chapters where he's acting as a renegade. Now, unfortunately, the interviewer didn't really pry into what's going on with him and his connection to the warp, but I'm certain that that would have played a major role in this. The fact that Titus's story arc was originally planned to take a dark turn like that adds a lot of credence to Leandros' accusations in the first game. In the official sequel, Titus ends up serving faithfully as a Black Shield in the Death Watch for 200 years, before proving his innocence and rejoining his brothers in the Ultramarines. In this version, he's a much more sympathetic and stoic character. And don't get me wrong, I like Titus well enough, he's one of my favorite Space Marine characters, but I can't help but think about what might have been. That whole renegade thing sounds admittedly kinda cool. Now I'm curious about what direction they're actually gonna go with both him and Leandros in the third game. There's something uniquely infuriating about characters like Leandros that are hard to fully articulate. Sure, we hate the villains of a story for their evil actions, but in settings like Warhammer 40K, those actions are often so cartoonishly over the top, so removed from real life, that they lose any sense of humanity. But betrayal, now that hits different. The dramatic irony of doing everything right, only to have someone you trust completely misunderstand your words, your actions, your intentions, and arrive at the worst possible conclusion about you, is something that we've all experienced at one point in our life or another. It's a painfully human experience. Communication is a flawed art, and even amongst the most well-intentioned people, it often breaks down. And when it does, it can leave long-lasting scars that mold our interactions with others. To me, that's why characters like Leandros get under my skin. Whether we realize it or not, they remind us of people we've known in real life. Someone who threw us under the bus, someone who misjudged us, someone who hid behind the rules instead of seeing the bigger picture. And in some cases, if we're being honest with ourselves, they might remind us of us, at least at one point in time. That, and let's be real, we hate them because nobody likes snitches. But just because we hate them, just because they're saying stuff no one wants to hear, doesn't always mean they're wrong. This is something that even someone like Captain Titus eventually has to confront.
Sir, I must apologize for my actions on Outposts.
Not necessary.
I fell prey to suspicion. Almost killed him.
When I was a young captain, one of my men questioned my motives, brushed his concerns aside, and I paid the price. Your suspicions arose because I failed to answer your doubts. As I failed to answer his.
Stand by for suborbital drop.
I'm honored to fight beside you both.
As are we, brother.
At the end of this video, I'm going to be totally honest with you, I'm not really anticipating changing too many people's minds about Leandros. He's one of the most hated characters for a reason. He's not a character that you're supposed to like. The fact that, to this day, he's still considered one of the most hated characters in the franchise is testament to the fact that the original writers of the first game did a pretty damn good job with him. When I say I don't think he did anything wrong, I mean fully in the context of 40K's lore. In reality, he failed Titus just like Titus failed him. Ironically, for a character so intrinsically tied to the ideas of faith, Leandros could not trust that which he could not confirm for himself, and Titus made no attempt to calm his brother's fears. In the end, they're both flawed characters, but for different reasons, and it's kind of interesting seeing them grow in the second game, and I'm really hopeful for where they're going to go in the third. But what do you think of all this? Do you think Leandros was right about everything, or is he an utter failure as an Ultramarine? What do you think of that original plan for Titus's story where he becomes a renegade? Do you think we'll get some type of redemption arc for Leandros? I'm not gonna lie, I would love that, and it looks like he's gonna play a much larger role in the third game, and may even be a squad mate. It's definitely gonna be difficult for them to pull off, but if they make Leandros a badass capable of demonstrating a certain level of growth, I think they might be able to turn fan sentiment back in his favor. Don't forget to leave a comment telling me what you think down in the comment section below. If you like this video and you think I earned it, hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to be notified of more 40K videos like this one in the future. As always, big thanks to everyone who supports all the work that I do, and I'll catch you all in the next one.